Imagine you lived through the greatest miracle in the history of the world. You saw an angel, felt the impossible happen inside you, and raised a son who split human history into before and after. And after all of this, the book simply stops talking about you. No explanation, no farewell, no recorded funeral, no epitaph. This is exactly what happens with Mary, the mother of Jesus, in the Bible. The last verse that mentions her by name is in Acts chapter 1. After that moment, there is absolute silence. Why? Was she forgotten by the very disciples of the Son she raised? Or is there something much deeper behind this silence? To understand the silence at the end, you must understand the brutal reality of the world she lived in. Jerusalem in the first century was not a safe haven. It was a powder keg of religious tension and political unrest. The air smelled of incense from the temple, but also of the cold iron of Roman swords and the dust of constant rebellion. After the resurrection, the narrative shifts, and Mary practically vanishes from the pages. But she didn't disappear because she was forgotten. She disappeared because the story she came to tell was already told. Yet, there was a physical reality to her silence: exile. Jerusalem was becoming increasingly dangerous. The early Christians lived under severe, life-threatening persecution. Having the name of the founder's mother widely documented and known in the writings that circulated would be putting her at terrible risk. She was the living memory of the impossible, the woman who had kept everything in her heart. But keeping her in the epicenter of the political and religious storms of Jerusalem was a definitive death sentence. Her exile was not an accident. It was a desperate, calculated measure of survival and love, orchestrated by the one person Jesus trusted most in his final moments. At the darkest moment of her life, standing by the cross, Mary watched the slow, humiliating Roman execution of her son. The crucifixion was not a quick death. It was the most humiliating and agonizing end the Romans could engineer, lasting hours, sometimes days. And Mary stood there, paralyzed in grief, watching. It was then, in his final act as a dying son, that Jesus secured her future. He looked at Mary and the disciple he loved and said, "Woman, behold your son," and to the disciple, "Behold your mother." From that hour, the disciple John took her into his own home. John took her away from the looming shadows of Golgotha. Tradition says it was in Ephesus. This wasn't just a simple change of address. It was a necessary exile to protect the most precious living witness of the gospel. In the years that followed, Jerusalem descended further into chaos and violence. The book of Acts narrates how Herod killed James and arrested Peter. The streets of the holy city were stained with the blood of the early believers. In this volatile context, an anonymity, even if partial, could be a vital security measure for her. If the authorities knew where the mother of the rebel king lived, she would have been a prime target to crush the new movement. John knew he had to keep her safe. The move to Ephesus meant leaving behind the land of her ancestors, the hills of Galilee, and the streets where her son had walked. She traded the familiar scent of the Judean desert for the salty breeze of the Aegean Sea. But this exile gave her something Jerusalem could not: time and profound peace. As the Christian movement expanded rapidly, with Paul traveling, Peter preaching, and the church growing in places like Ephesus, Corinth, and Rome, Mary lived out her days away from the violent epicenter. She became a hidden, foundational pillar for a church that was about to take over the world. Imagine the daily life of Mary in this foreign land. She, who was once a young Jewish girl from Nazareth, a town so small and irrelevant that people asked if anything good could come from it, was now an elderly woman in a bustling Greco-Roman metropolis. She was not a roaming preacher. She was a living memory, an eyewitness to monumental events that the apostles only knew secondhand. Do you think John, who took her into his home, didn't ask her questions by the firelight? Do you think the believers who traveled from far away didn't yearn to be near her? It is highly probable that Mary was a living source of information for the early Christians. Luke, the author of the third Gospel and of Acts, almost certainly interviewed Mary to write the scenes of the birth that only she could tell. The visitation of the angel, the meeting with Elizabeth, the Magnificat, what she said, what she witnessed, what she felt in her deepest core. Much of this reached us through the texts, even if her name no longer appears in them. Her exile was profoundly fruitful. By stepping back from the public eye, she allowed the message of her Son to take center stage. The silence of the texts does not mean the absence of the person. It means that the biblical narrative is the announcement of a message, not a biography of Mary. When the message is given, the messengers can step off the stage without diminishing what they did. She was the first person to say yes to the gospel, long before any apostle or miracle. She never asked for fame, for records, or to have her name remembered. She simply obeyed. In her quiet exile, she continued that obedience, nurturing the early church not with loud speeches, but with the quiet, unshakable truth of her memories, grounding the new faith in absolute reality. There is a chilling historical reality that proves her exile was not just a precaution, but a divine rescue. Decades after she left, the prophecy her Son had spoken over Jerusalem came true with terrifying precision. In the year 70 AD, the Roman general Titus surrounded Jerusalem with 80,000 soldiers. The city, which believed itself invincible with its monumental walls, became a suffocating trap. The Roman siege brought a famine so severe that people ate boiled leather and belts, and the streets were covered with corpses. When the Romans finally breached the defenses, the glorious temple of Herod, whose stones weighed hundreds of tons, was burned to ashes in a single afternoon. Over 1 million people died, and tens of thousands were taken as slaves. Not a single stone was left upon another, exactly as Jesus had predicted 40 years earlier. But here is the most powerful and redeeming detail. The Christians of Jerusalem, remembering the prophetic words of Jesus, had fled the city before the siege closed around them. There is no record that any of them died in that horrific massacre. Mary's earlier departure to Ephesus under John's careful watch was the ultimate foresight. While Jerusalem burned to the ground and the old world was violently erased from the map, the mother of the Messiah was completely safe. Her exile was not a punishment. It was her miraculous preservation. It allowed the roots of Christianity to grow deep in the Gentile world, far from the flames and blood of Judea. She carried the true temple, the presence of the Holy Spirit, within her, long after the physical temple of stone was destroyed. The woman who was filled with the Holy Spirit to conceive the Son of God was filled with the Spirit again when the church was born, and she carried that sacred fire into the very heart of the Roman Empire. Mary's final portrait in the Bible is found in Acts 1:14, where she is seen persevering unanimously in prayer and supplication with the disciples. She is exactly where she should be, not on a throne, not seeking the center stage, not demanding to be worshipped, but interceding anonymously in the crowd alongside fishermen and former tax collectors. The mother of Jesus, the woman who carried the Son of God for 9 months and served as a crucial witness to the resurrection, became part of something vastly larger than any single name could contain. Her quiet exile teaches us the highest and purest form of leaving a mark on the world, not when everyone loudly speaks your name, but when what you did is woven into everything, even when no one needs to say who you were. The message that started with her simple, "Yes, has reached the ends of the earth, translated into thousands of languages, whispered in dark prison cells, and tattooed on skin. And hidden deep within that massive, invisible message is the quiet, unbreakable faithfulness of a young girl from Nazareth who never asked to be famous, only to be faithful. She was not forgotten. She went far beyond any mere mention. Sometimes, the seasons of our lives where we feel hidden, exiled, or silenced are actually the moments God is shielding us from the fires we cannot yet see. Mary's quiet years in Ephesus shaped the very Gospels we read today. She is deeply embedded in every page, even when her name is entirely absent. If this story touched you in any way, or if Mary's silent strength gave you a new perspective on being hidden for a higher purpose, please leave a comment below. What do you think was the hardest part of Mary's hidden life after Jesus ascended? I want to read every single answer. Subscribe to the channel, activate the bell, and share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Imagine the darkest moment a human being can endure. At the foot of the cross, Mary watched the slow and humiliating Roman execution of her own son. Crucifixion was not a quick death. It was the most agonizing end Roman engineering could conceive, lasting long hours, sometimes days under relentless heat. And Mary was there, paralyzed by excruciating pain, watching every forced breath. The smell of blood, sweat, and dust mingled with the pitiless cries of the crowd. It was at that exact instant, in his final act as an earthly son, that Jesus secured her future. He looked at Mary and at the disciple he loved and pronounced, "Woman, behold your son," and to the disciple, "Behold your mother." From that fateful hour, John took her into his home. He took her out of the oppressive and bloody shadows of Golgotha. Ancient tradition and historical records point to Ephesus as her final destination. This was not just a simple change of address. It was a painful and absolutely necessary exile to protect the most precious living witness of the gospel. In the years that followed, Jerusalem plunged into a chaos of extreme violence. The book of Acts narrates how Herod killed James by the sword and imprisoned Peter in dungeons. The streets of the holy city were increasingly stained with the blood of the first believers. In this volatile context, anonymity was her only wall of protection. If the authorities discovered where the mother of the rebel king lived, she would be the perfect target to crush the new movement at its roots. John knew he had to keep her safe, far from the relentless eyes of Rome and the Sanhedrin. The flight to Ephesus meant leaving behind the land of her ancestors, the familiar hills of Galilee, and the dusty streets where her son had walked. She traded the dry heat of the Judean desert for the salty breeze of the Aegean Sea. Yet, this forced exile gave her something vital that Jerusalem could no longer offer: time, silence, and an unbreakable refuge to ground the first steps of the Christian faith. Imagine Mary's daily life in this strange and unknown land. She, who had once been a young Jewish woman from Nazareth, a village so tiny and irrelevant that the Jews themselves questioned if anything good could come from there, was now an elderly woman walking the glistening marble streets of Ephesus. This was a vibrant Greco-Roman metropolis, dominated by the colossal shadow of the Temple of Artemis, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. The contrast was absolute and overwhelming. The dense smell of pagan incense and the constant hum of silver idol merchants replaced Hebrew chants, and the familiar aroma of unleavened bread baking in the clay ovens of Judea. However, it was exactly in this unlikely setting that the most intimate behind-the-scenes details of our faith were documented. Mary was not a public square preacher shouting to crowds. She was the living memory of the Incarnation. She was the only eyewitness to monumental events that the apostles only knew secondhand. Do you really think the Apostle John, sharing the same roof with her for years, didn't ask her endless questions by the flickering light of the hearth? Do you believe the first Christian leaders didn't long to hear her calm voice? It is historically probable and widely accepted that Luke, the meticulous doctor and author of the third gospel, interviewed her personally. How else could he narrate with such sensory and intimate detail the angel's visit, the encounter with Elizabeth, and the powerful song of the Magnificat? Luke recorded with surgical precision what she had kept in her heart for decades. Much of the depth we have today regarding Jesus' humanity reached us through the stories she shared during those nights of exile in Ephesus. Her withdrawal was not an erasure, it was a divine strategy. By stepping out of the public eye, she ensured the main stage belonged solely to her son's message. She anchored the roots of the early church not with eloquent speeches, but with the unshakable truth of her motherly memories. There is a chilling historical reality that proves her exile was not just a human precaution, but a millimetrically orchestrated divine rescue. Decades after her silent departure from Jerusalem, the prophecy her son had spoken over the city was fulfilled with terrifying precision. In 70 AD, the Roman general Titus besieged the holy city with tens of thousands of relentless soldiers. Jerusalem, which thought itself invincible with its colossal walls, turned into a suffocating trap. The Roman siege brought a hunger so desperate that the vivid accounts of the historian Flavius Josephus describe inhabitants boiling and devouring the leather of their own belts to survive. When the legions finally broke through the defenses, Herod's glorious temple, whose stones weighed hundreds of tons, was reduced to ashes and rubble in a single afternoon of carnage. More than 1 million people perished, and the old order was violently wiped off the map, with not one stone left upon another, exactly as Jesus had predicted. But here lies the most powerful theological and historical detail. The first Christians, remembering Christ's words of warning, fled the city before the siege closed in. Mary's early departure for Ephesus, under John's watchful care, was the ultimate foresight. While Jerusalem burned to its foundations, the mother of the Messiah was perfectly safe, far from that bloodbath. Bringing this into our daily lives, Mary's exile teaches us a profound lesson about the doors that close against our will. How often do we weep for having to leave a place, a position, or a dream, feeling exiled and hidden from the world? What this story shows us is that the abrupt removal from a familiar setting is rarely a punishment. Most of the time, it is a miraculous preservation. The place God took her from was the place destined to crumble. Far from the flames of Judea, she carried within her the true and indestructible temple, the Holy Spirit, keeping the flame of faith alive in a world that was only just beginning. Imagine the stifling heat of the upper room in Jerusalem, days before Pentecost. The sound is not of fiery speeches, but the constant, reverent murmur of prayers mixed with the soft crackle of oil lamps. It is here, in the book of Acts, chapter 1, verse 14, that the Bible offers us the final portrait of Mary. She is exactly where she always chose to be. Not on a high throne, not demanding the center of attention, not claiming the title of Mother of the Founder, but interceding anonymously in the midst of the crowd. She stood side by side with fishermen with calloused hands, former tax collectors, and women of deep faith. The woman who sheltered the Son of God in her womb for 9 months and witnessed the absolute miracle of the resurrection became part of something infinitely greater than any individual name could contain. Her silent exile, first in the transition of the upper room and later in the constant breeze of Ephesus, teaches us the purest and highest way to leave a legacy. True greatness does not happen when everyone shouts our name in the squares, but when what we build intertwines with eternity, even if our figure disappears into the shadows of history. The revolution that began with her simple and terrifying yes reached the ends of the earth. It was translated into thousands of dialects, whispered in damp prison cells, and chanted in majestic cathedrals. And hidden in the depths of that colossal message beats the unbreakable faithfulness of a young woman from Nazareth who never begged for fame, only obeyed. The silence of the sacred texts is not an oversight. It is the majestic echo of a mission accomplished with perfection. If this journey through the hidden history of Mary touched your soul and gave you a new perspective on the power of being hidden in a greater purpose, I need to hear from you. Leave your comment below. What do you think was the most difficult moment for Mary during her silent exile? Do you have any questions about this fascinating historical period? Write in the comments, as I want to read and respond to each of you. Please subscribe to the channel right now. Turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any of our upcoming epic stories, and share this video with someone who needs to know that, for God, being in silence never means being forgotten.